I'm really excited because today is the start of our Jane Eyre book discussion. I've prepared some questions or really just, starting points for various discussions, some quotes, some big moments that happened in the first 5 chapters that we can discuss. So basically the way this is going to work is every Sunday I will post those questions. You already know what chapters to read, and I'll share that back out as well so that it's just a reminder for y'all. But we can just plan on reading those chapters together, discussing throughout the course of the week. So if today is a busy day for you, don't worry about it. We can just talk about it all week long. And we'll start reading the next chapters as well, and we'll talk about those next week. So that is where we're at right now. So I'm going to jump into some of those discussions, and I hope that you will join me in doing so. All right, have a great day. All right, let's talk about the first question. So I was aware that a lot of books, back in the day that were written by women had to be published under a pseudonym of a man. I didn't realize until I started actually reading Jane Eyre that this was one of those times. So in this particular edition that I have, it actually goes into that a little bit. There's a preface. The preface contains a few different notes for the different editions by Currier Bell. So the fact of the matter was that not only did Charlotte Bronte have to publish this under a male pseudonym, but also after multiple reprints and multiple editions of the book doing really well, she still had to keep up that facade, and that's just bananas to me. I also find it really funny that the world at large would think that like this coming of age novel about this young girl would have to be written by a man. Like why was it that, we couldn't just accept that maybe women could understand what it's like to be a woman? With that being said, I completely don't care nowadays when I see, men writing books that star women and, women writing books that star men. Like none of that matters to me. I also don't care about when authors choose to use pseudonyms in 2020, but it's just bananas to me that Charlotte Bronte would have been kind of forced, as well as her sisters too. So that was kind of my first reaction starting this book is, wow, this is one of those books that we had to pretend we were a guy just to get published. So kind of interesting, but let me know your thoughts on that as well. All right, so this next discussion is really about a quote that just struck me when I was reading the first chapter of this book. In my edition, it's actually just on page 8, so it's very, very early on. But where was it? Okay, every nerve I had feared him, and every morsel of flesh in my bones shrank when he came near. And then it goes on, there were moments when I was bewildered by the terror he inspired, because I had no appeal whatever against either his menaces or his inflictions, etc., etc. So, being just introduced to Jane Eyre as a character and as a book, and having her speak so strongly about this relationship that she has with John, her cousin, and how he's just kind of this maybe psychopath, I don't know. More to come perhaps on that, but the fact that, she's just this young girl and she's writing about this strong reaction she has against him, and it actually, as I read books, I kind of think about what is the author going through that made them write this or that, and reading that passage in particular, I was like, wow, I am curious if there was some sort of, abusive person in Charlotte Bronte's life, or maybe the life of like a friend or someone close to her, because just the emotion behind that particular passage just really stuck out to me. So let me know what you thought of that passage as well, and we can discuss. Okay, so continuing on with our last discussion that we talked about how much Jane was fearing her cousin John, we then get to the moment that she's just kind of peacefully reading a book in a windowsill, trying to be kept alone. And I mean, girl after my own heart, I always kind of wanted that window seat, book nook type situation. So good for her that she found it. But she gets disturbed immediately by her cousin kind of just starting to try to start something. He wants to cause havoc in her life. As soon as he approaches her, he then decides, just yelling at her isn't enough, berating her isn't enough. So he makes her stand somewhere that is out of the way of glass windows or, glass decor, tchotchkes, whatever in the house, so that he can throw a book at her head, which not only, causes her to start bleeding and all this stuff. It's obviously not this book, which has a pretty soft cover, because this would not cause me to bleed. But, come on, guys. When that happened, I was like, what is this guy doing right now? That is not normal. Where are all the adults? And I get that I'm picturing this very big manor, so, maybe the adults are just dispersed and they don't hear this going on. But, oh my goodness, I feel like he needs to be reined in, because that's really not okay to be that violent in general. So, that was really what was going through my mind when I read that passage. I just couldn't believe it. So let me know what your thoughts were when you get to that point. All right, so our next one is another reflection of a quote from the book. So this one is in chapter 2. And Jane is thinking to herself, and she says, "I doubted not, never doubted, that if Mr. Reed had been alive, he would have treated me kindly." So this is at the point that she's in the red room, the room that her uncle had passed away in. And, she's in this situation where she's orphaned, and so she's living with her aunt and uncle and cousins, but then her uncle, who is the one biologically related to her, although in my mind and growing up, you had your aunt and uncle and you didn't care which one was blood and which one wasn't. But in this case, her uncle passes away, and then she is left with her aunt, who doesn't really care for her very much, and then her cousins, who are terrible to her. So this is really her reflection of just her certainty that things would be different if her uncle was still with us. So I just found that to be kind of an interesting moment that not only lets us know a little bit more about her uncle, since he doesn't get to actually, walk the pages of the book since he is dead before the book begins, but it also kind of lets us know a little bit more about Jane Eyre as well. All right, so now we are in chapter 3, and there's this whole passage where we have Bessie singing a song to Jane, and Jane is kind of just appreciating the song and her sweet voice, and she's really enjoying the moment. So Jane ends up crying, and Bessie says, "Come, Miss Jane, don't cry," said Bessie as she finished. She might as well have said to the fire, "Don't burn." But how could she divine the morbid suffering to which I was a prey? In the course of the morning, Mr. Lloyd came again. So, okay, this one kind of made me laugh to myself a little bit, and I know that it was supposed to be this special moment between Jane and Bessie, but it just kind of reeked of teen angst, which nice job, Charlotte Bronte, for really articulating that. But yes, Jane's life isn't the greatest at the moment. She's living with these people who don't really want her there. But just, I don't know, that was just so melodramatic, and I just found it kind of funny. So don't know if any of you also had that type of reaction to it, but that was my first thought when I read that passage. So let me know what you thought. All right, so just to discuss the experience in general that occurred in chapter 2, but was really, you know, reflected upon in chapter 3. So Jane gets put in what's referred to as the Red Room. This is actually the room that her uncle died in. Some of the help thinks that there's a ghost of him in there, so there's kind of that little supernatural, gothic vibe going on there as well. But so she is squirreled away there, and she is very upset about this, and she's kind of telling her aunt, like, this is unforgivable that you did this. So I thought that this was one of the biggest events that really happened in the first few chapters that we read for the first week, because not only did this really set the tone of her relationship between her and her aunt, as well as her and the other people who live in the house, but it also is what kind of gave her the opportunity to say that she wanted out. So it really laid the foundation for what it appears is to come. So that was another just pivotal moment in my mind. Let me know if you have other thoughts or opinions on it as well. Alrighty, so this next one is reflecting on a passage again. So this one is still in chapter 3, and this is when we have Mr. Lloyd here talking to Jane about her circumstances and what's going on. So he starts to ask her, do you have other options? Do you have other family members that you could potentially go stay with? And Jane starts to say, I don't know, I asked Aunt Read once and she said possibly I might have some poor low relations called Eyre, but she knew nothing about them. So he says back to her, if you had such, would you like to go to them? She says, I reflected, poverty looks grim to grown people, still more so to children. They have not much idea of industrious working, respectable poverty. They think of the word only as connected with ragged clothes, a scanty food, fireless grates, rude manners, and debasing vices. Poverty for me was synonymous with degradation. So she ends up saying out loud, no, I should not like to belong to poor people, was my reply. He says, not even if they were kind to you? She shakes her head. I could not see how poor people had the means of being kind, and then to learn to speak like them, to adopt their manners, to be uneducated, to grow up like one of the poor women I saw sometimes nursing their children or washing their clothes at the cottage doors of the village of Gateshead. No, I was not heroic enough to purchase liberty at the price of caste. Okay, so that was a really interesting and really telling passage to me. I feel like, she's been in this loop for so long that she hasn't had people actually really caring for her. So she's not really understanding what that could look like for her. And also she has been raised around a certain amount of wealth, and so she is seeing that as the norm and everything else as, less than. So this passage in particular was probably the passage that stuck out to me the most in our first 5 chapters. I just thought it was kind of such a telling glimpse into how she was raised, because thinking even about caste or anything like that, I think comes into your upbringing as well. I'm very curious to see how this plays out throughout the rest of the book. As you guys know, I have not read this before, so I'm kind of just picking quotes that speak to me in the moment or events that seem significant, but I'm not able to do that with a lens of having read the whole book. So I do find that this passage just was really interesting. Like, what is going to happen to Jane moving forward that might make it so she is in a lower caste that she was afraid of? Is she going to find the people who are just truly kind to her in her life? I'm hoping she is. So that's really what I wanted to kind of discuss for this one, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are with that passage as well. All right, so that brings us to our final discussion topic for this week. And this last one, I just kind of wanted to discuss in general what is going on here. So Jane finally gets her wish. She gets out of the house. So after her pleading and discussions and saying how she would like to go away to a boarding school, finally that wish is granted. It was a bit sad for me at certain times because Jane ends up eavesdropping on her aunt talking about how she doesn't even want her to come back for holidays or breaks or whatever, that the other kids might do so. Definitely made me think a little bit of Harry Potter when, you know, we see Harry left behind for the winter holidays and, you know, he doesn't have a place where he belongs since he's also orphaned. So it just was one of those moments that was pivotal, I would assume pivotal for the book, because now it's kind of setting her off in a different direction, which it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But also just really interesting to have her go off to this boarding school at such a young age. And so it's almost like we're going to look back and see the before of, you know, really chapters, I think 1 to 4 would be the before she goes, and then we're going to get into this phase that started with chapter 5 of the during. And then depending on how old she gets in this book, maybe there's many other kind of easy segments that we could make. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting to see what she learns at the school, from her classmates, what type of experiences that leads to overall. But really, I just am happy for her that she's getting to start the next chapter of her life. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'm going to be starting to read chapter 6 today, and I will continue on. And so I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on the first 5 chapters, as well as discuss some of the future items. All right, happy reading.